Hey everybody, Mr. John from the Meredith Public Library here, coming back at you once again with another episode of the Quarantine Theater. Today I've got my third installment of If Then and Now, the show where I take a look at 4 titles from the public domain and 4 related modern titles. Let me see. So public domain, if you don't know, means that the book is no longer under copyright, or maybe was never put under copyright. Sometimes authors do that, which means that we, the public, own the book. Pretty cool to think about. A great resource for finding and reading these public domain books is Project Gutenberg. The website is gutenberg.org. There you'll have access to over 40,000 public domain titles in multiple formats, including audio, totally for free right through your browser. Another great way to read public domain titles, though, is just through whatever downloadable books app or resource you use, such as the Libby app by Overdrive. This is the downloadable book resource available through your friendly neighborhood public library. So get your library card number, surf on over to nh.overdrive.com or download the Libby app, and you can be reading books today. Pretty cool. All right, so our first public domain title of the day is The Masque of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. This one is pretty on the nose for our current situation. In The Masque of the Red Death, a plague is ravaging the countryside, and a rich prince, Prince Prospero, has invited 1,000 lord and ladies to his castle to ride out the pandemic, and they'll be safe and secure inside this castle. So this is a great example of Gothic fiction. You know, we're thinking castles and dark rooms and creepy imagery. It was a real reaction to the medieval romantic writing that took place before this. The authors of this time thought it was a little too sweet, so they introduced, and this is a great phrase, a pleasurable kind of terror, which I think is a great description of Gothic fiction. You've got just a real spooky setting for your book when you're starting with Gothic fiction. And that setting is really the star of The Masque of the Red Death. So all these rich people think they're safe in their castle, but the castle itself is very spooky. You know, tall rooms, narrow hallways. It's very labyrinthian. Just the whole setting just puts you ill at ease, makes you feel less safe being in here. Really great book, and it kind of plays with some of the ideas that I think a lot of us have going through our heads right now. Stuff like, you know, am I really safer in here than out there? Is all of this safety an illusion? A really great book, something that I think is going to be on your mind for a few days after you read it. It's a nice short one too, so you can get it done real quick. So our modern take on this theme is The Loners. It's the book 1 in the Quarantine series by Lex Thomas. Again, this is out of my YA collection, which means it's about teenagers, not for teenagers, so you can read it, I promise. So in this book, it is a post-apocalyptic tale. Something occurs that causes everyone under the age of 18 to become poisonous to those over the age of 18, which is discovered one day. This takes place at a high school, and the teacher in the front of the classroom just keels over and then vomits up blood and organs and dies right there in front of the class. That's how this whole thing gets kicked off. It's crazy. So there's then a time jump a year forward, and the whole school is still under quarantine. Everything's locked down. They airlift food in. There's no in and out. And how the cliques have become gangs. It's a really interesting tale from there. But it starts and really plays with the same sort of ideas from Masque of the Red Death about safety and, you know, is it an illusion? Can we ever be safe? Are we better off out there? What are we really hiding from? That sort of thing. A lot of the same themes, but this is going to be totally different reads, but I highly recommend both of them. You're really going to enjoy The Masque of the Red Death in public domain and The Loners by Lex Thomas. All right, our next public domain title is Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus by Mary Shelley. This is a book you probably recognize. You at least know the character, I would guess. But if you haven't read the book, the character in your head is probably a lot different than the character on the page. I think modern culture has sort of warped Frankenstein's monster. We picture a big, you know, empty-headed, heart of gold behemoth who's just rejected, and that leads him to lash out. That is not at all Mary Shelley's creature. He is articulate and intelligent. and kind of charming, but just straight up evil. Like if you slight him in the least, he will straight up murder your whole family. Just a bad, bad dude. So we kind of have a different idea about this character than Shelley really intended. Really quick too, Mary Shelley, just the story behind this book is great. Mary Shelley came up with it as a teenager. She was in a horror writing competition with her lover and future husband and their friends, bunch of creepy gothic weirdos who hung out in cemeteries and stuff, and had horror writing competitions, which she won with this tale, Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus. So the original telling of this story was out loud. This is an oral tale told by a love-struck, dark-minded teenager. And it wasn't published for a few more years. And the first run in 1818 was published anonymously. It wasn't until 1821 in the second printing that she got her name on the title, which is pretty rare for that day and age. Definitely noteworthy. So again, you probably have a different idea in your head if you've never read the book about Frankenstein's monster and his motivations and the relationship with Victor Frankenstein, who in himself is a really complicated, interesting character. Really great book. Again, you probably have an idea in your head of this character that's really going to be in stark contrast to Mary Shelley's monster, who I will point out in the original oral telling, she named him Adam. So we got a direct biblical reference there. Of course, in the novel, he's only ever referred to as the monster, the thing. He's called the abortion once, which is pretty gross. But yeah, totally a different character than you have in your head, I would bet. So totally go read Frankenstein. Great, great book. So our modern tale that is connected, it's a pretty direct connection, is This Monstrous Thing by Mackenzi Lee. So this book takes place in Geneva in 1818. So we already have our connection. Frankenstein, the story takes place in Geneva, and again was first published in 1818. But this monstrous thing takes place in a kind of an alternate history. This is a steampunk universe. Clockwork men, these sort of automaton have been developed before electronics. They just use clockwork mechanisms to power these artificial human beings. But then we start getting some shades of Blade Runner. These artificial humans are second-class citizens. They're hunted down. They're treated poorly. Even the mechanics that work on them are this is illegal. You can't be a mechanic for these things. You can't take care of them. So really interesting setting right off the bat. Really very cool. So the main character is one of these mechanics. So he's kind of living constantly on the run, and his family disagrees with his life choices. So you got a really interesting character there to begin with. And then his brother dies. And he cannot handle the grief and uses his technology and skills to bring his brother back to life. Of course, he's immediately horrified because the thing that he brought back is not the brother that he lost. And he's just mortified and rejects the whole thing. But then, in the book, This Monstrous Thing, the novel Frankenstein gets published anonymously. And suddenly, this character is looking at this book about basically what he just did to his brother. And it's published anonymously, and he suddenly has to figure out, does somebody know? Has somebody been watching me? Who published this book? It just takes off. There's so many wonderful layers going on in this book, and they're stitched together just masterfully. I am a huge fan of This Monstrous Thing. Whether you're a fan of Frankenstein or not, you will really get a kick out of that one by Mackenzi Lee. All right, great book. Okay, our next public domain title is Peter and Wendy by J.M. Barrie. So Peter Pan, we all know Peter Pan, right? But what you might not know is that Peter and Wendy, which is the story you all know with the Lost Boys and the Wendy and Captain Hook and the whole nine yards, is not the original appearance of the character Peter Pan. Peter Pan appeared in a book called The Little White Bird. The Little White Bird? The Little White Bird in 1902, which was a J.M. Barrie collection of kind of short stories about the fantastical fairy world that appears when humans aren't looking. Really sweet, cute little collection. And in that collection was a story about a 7-day-old infant named Peter Pan. In J.M. Barrie's world, all infants were recently birds, and 7-day-old Peter Pan flies out the window of his nursery and flies to Kensington Park, where he meets up with the fairy people and he starts talking with different animals. But then a crow points out to him that you are no longer a bird, you are a boy. And suddenly Peter Pan's like, oh, nuts, I'm a boy. I can't fly anymore. So he's stuck there in the park. Eventually, he makes friends with the fairy queen who grants him a wish. He says, I wish to see my mother one more time. So they fly him back to his nursery, where he sees his mother asleep next to his bed, his empty bed, and just feels so terrible for his mother that he knows he has to go back, say his goodbyes to the fairy world, and then return for good. So he goes back to Kensington Park to say goodbye to everybody, but takes too long. And by the time he gets back to his house again, his mother has had another baby to love and no longer needs him. A lot of subtext here. So Peter flies back to the park and forever lives among the fairy people as a little boy. So that is the original Peter Pan. Again, that came out in 1902 originally. Then it was pulled out. The story of Peter Pan was pulled out of The Little White Bird and published as Peter Pan of Kensington Park. Then it wasn't for a few more years before Barrie expanded on this story some more and wrote the story that we know with the Lost Boys and Captain Hook and everything. But what you might not know is that this novel, Peter and Wendy, was not the original telling of even that story. It was a play 7 years before it was a novel, a play called Peter Pan, the Boy Who Would Not Grow Up. That is the origination of the character of Peter Pan and the whole story that we know from the Disney movie and everybody loves. So it's just a really interesting progression from a side character in a collection to getting pulled out and giving his own book, and then expanded even farther into a play, which Barrie tinkered with for his entire life until he died. He was messing with this play. And then eventually into the novel, which we all know and love. It's a really interesting story. Peter and Wendy is a good enough book, is a fun enough book, but I find the life of J.M. Barrie way more interesting. All right, so for our novel, our modern take on Peter and Wendy, I have a team and a character that you probably recognize if you're a fan of Marvel movies, which you might not have picked up on the fairly direct reference to Peter and Wendy. Guardians of the Galaxy, great couple of movies, and their leader, Star-Lord, aka Peter Quill. Peter, there we go, that's our Peter Pan. Peter Quill leaves Earth where he can't return, lives forever as a sort of man-boy fighting throughout space. It's a pretty direct Peter Pan reference. And it's if you've seen the movies, this is a really interesting cast of characters. This is the legacy storyline that I have up here. This came out in 2008. It really introduced the characters as we know them today. But the comic book, I think, is even better because it's got way more characters and some pretty cool ones too, like Adam Warlock or Cosmo, the Soviet space dog, who is a psychic dog. It's pretty cool. So if you love the movies, definitely check out the comic books. I think they're even better. Again, this was the legacy storyline, the Guardians of the Galaxy title. Awesome. Love Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm a huge fan of those movies too. All right, so our next public domain title, our last one for the day, is The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. I am a huge Robert Louis Stevenson fan. I love his writing style. He really sucks you in. Some great adventures. But this is a book, I think somewhat like Frankenstein, that modern audiences maybe have a different idea in their head of what these characters are than how the author originally envisioned them. I think especially thanks to pop culture installments like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which was originally a comic book and then a movie, we kind of picture Mr. Hyde as more of the Hulk to the Bruce Banner Dr. Jekyll, where he gets big and strong and it kind of creates or releases this dark side to him where he goes out and he's violent. But that is not really at all what this story is actually about. Dr. Jekyll in this original story recognizes these awful, terrible impulses within himself, but also realizes that it will really interfere with his social life and his career if he goes out as Dr. Jekyll and starts murdering people. So he creates this potion basically as a disguise. And it turns him, so he gets smaller, he kind of shrivels up, his skin looks wrong, and he's described as just looking unnatural, like he shouldn't be alive, not big and hulking. But it's a disguise, and that allows him to act out these nasty, horrible, evil impulses. It's not really creating them, it's giving him a disguise to allow him to act them out. So a little different, I think, than what we imagine, what pop culture has maybe told us about. I know I'm specifically thinking back to the Looney Tunes, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, in which the Tweety Bird drinks the potion, gets big, It's pretty great. It's a classic, but again, is not really true to this original tale. So definitely go and read it. I think you're going to have a great time. It's gruesome. It's pretty gross, but really entertaining, a little bit of horror. So my modern telling is very much related to this idea of changing our appearance in order to allow ourselves to turn a thought into an act. The book is The Visible Man by Chuck Klosterman. So this is definitely not a YA novel. This is for adults. It's got some pretty adult themes in there, so don't hand it to your middle schooler, please. Chuck Klosterman, you might recognize the name. He's mostly known as a nonfiction writer. He's a journalist, written for places like Esquire, ESPN.com, Rolling Stone. He's won awards for his music criticism. He's mostly known as a nonfiction writer, but he's got a handful of novels. Of course, most of his novels are just allowing him to use fictional characters to sort of play out his ideas about pop culture and American society. He's very much the Quentin Tarantino of the written word. So this book in particular is about a therapist, this poor therapist, who through the over the phone takes on a new client. And that client claims that he is a scientist who has developed technology that allows him to be invisible to the human eye. And he uses that invisibility to watch people. That's his science. He wants to observe people alone. And so he takes all kinds of weird notes. And of course, the therapist, when she takes him on because she believes he's having delusions, and that's why she takes him on as a client. But as they continue to meet over the phone and through email, she starts to doubt a lot of things. Things start getting too realistic. Her life starts falling apart because of this. She really starts to lose her mind. It's really interesting. This is a nice, short, quick, tight read too, peppered full of great pop and modern culture criticism. It's got a couple of great lines about Facebook in there. This is really interesting, and again, plays the same sort of ideas from the Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde about changing your appearance in order to allow yourself to act out some of these deep, dark inside impulses that apparently we all have. I've never felt like murdering anybody, but that's just me. All right, so that was The Visible Man by Chuck Klosterman, our modern title, and our public domain was The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Available for you to read right now. Go check them out. All right, folks, thanks so much for watching. As always, be nice to each other out there. Take care of yourself and have a great day. Okay, see ya.